Well, this week's lesson actually comes from the 8th portion from the book of Numbers, and it's the 41st overall from the Torah portion series, and it is Torah portion Phinehas, or as we would say in English, Phinehas. And in this, it is going to be from Numbers chapter 25, verse 10, and it concludes at the first verse of chapter 30. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about a man, a location, and we're going to talk about a particular letter in a particular word. And of course, when it comes to the individual we're going to talk about, you probably already know who this is going to be. It's going to be none other than Phinehas himself. And prior to talking about Phinehas, I think in light of last week's portion, I think it would be good to revisit that. And of course, this is going through the story of Balak and Balaam. Balak is a little perturbed. He's upset. We find Israel absolutely tearing through a lot of the peoples in their conquest on their way to the promised land. And most notably, they tear through Sihon and Og. And this leaves Balak, like I said, really frustrated, leaves him really scared. And so he believes his best tactic is to flex his pocketbook, and he calls for and eventually comes into contact with Balaam, and they kind of have this agreement where you're going to sabotage Israel. You are going to speak curses against them. Name your price, it's yours. And we go through several instances where Balaam, he even says, I can only say and only put out the words that God puts in my mouth. I understand, do what you can, please curse the people. And it doesn't work out so well for Balak, because every time Balaam opens his mouth, it's this lavish, rich blessings that he speaks over Israel time again. And it is leaving Balak at his wit's end. And finally, what happens, he says, look, I've hired you to curse these people. You're not doing anything of it. Balaam eventually folds shop and says, look, there's nothing I can say or nothing really that I can do that's going to cut the legs out from underneath the people. They're blessed by God. It's almost like Isaiah says, there's no weapon that's formed against them that's going to prosper. Literally, these quote-unquote curses that Balaam is speaking over Israel, they were so beautiful that at one point in time, they were considered to become part of the Jewish daily liturgy, the blessings, the prayers that they say on their daily religion. Biggest reason they're not is because of the length of what these quote-unquote curses are. And so anyways, the long and skinny of it is Balaam finally tells them, look, there's nothing I can say or do. However, I can't do anything. You can't do anything. But they can cause their own fall and their own demise through self-sabotage. So he gives them this counsel about sending out the women, because after all, like a dog would follow his nose, I'm pretty sure we could get a bunch of the men to follow their eyes and transgress and commit this spiritual adultery. Well, you look at Numbers 25, you find right on, bullseye, bingo, it happened. Talks about how they invited the people to sacrifice to their gods. The people ate, they bowed down to the gods, and it says that Israel was joined to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. Now, when you take a look at the word Peor, I think it's a word that really, when you flesh it out, literally speaking, you find a lot of congruency with the Balak-Balaam situation. If you take the first letter of Peor, it's the letter Pe. And the letter, just like the word, it literally means mouth. So in context, it's like mouth, it's speaking, what goes into the mouth, what comes out of the mouth. And you look at the remaining three letters, Ayin, Vav, Resh, and it's the word or. And there's actually two words in Hebrew called or. There's this one, and there's another or that actually means light. This or, however, means skin. And I just find it interesting that Balaam talks about how to throw the women out there to him, see what happens, and all of a sudden, he speaks this flesh, this skin, this exposure, let them follow the desire of their eyes, and it's just step one on a huge domino effect that's going to take them down. And we actually find that because of this suggestion of this situation, we find 24,000 men had fallen. And here's the thing, when you go to the beginning of the book of Numbers and up to this point in time, there are two censuses that are balanced. One beginning towards the end of their wilderness experience, one kind of at the bookend at the end. And we find in the first one, 603,550 people. And on the second one, we find approximately a difference of 1,800 people. And for people who are blessed by God, who God has carried them through the wilderness, we find the reason why their population is smaller at the end than compared to the beginning was because of instances like this where they were given to the desires, whether it was to the foreign women, to the foreign gods. They sabotaged and, they tied their own shoes to the laces of the other shoe and tripped themselves flat on the face. The transgression of what happened at Sinai. We find that their biggest enemy oftentimes was themselves, because at the end, they were only 99.698% of the population they were before. That being said, when it comes to the census, it does not include those of the ages from birth to 19 years of age, or the military retirees, the men, or it also doesn't include the women. But there's one other classification of people that the census doesn't take into consideration. Those under 20, those over 20, the women, and it also does not include or tally the number of the priests that existed from the tribe of Levites. So whenever we come to these numbers, there's one person that we will come and find was not accounted for in that number, and one of those people was Phinehas. With him being a Levite, especially with him being the grandson of Aaron, he was not to touch or grab or have anything to do with instruments or items of war. And what do we find at the tail end of last week's Torah portion? We take and find that he takes up this javelin, takes up this spear, and he thrusts through this man and woman who are committing this idolatry in front of the tabernacle of meeting. But because of his brass, his bold, what happens? All of a sudden, the plague is no more, and it stops at 24,000 people. And one verse I want to read to you. We'll start, and we'll just read the first 3 verses of this portion. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, again, grandson, has turned back my wrath from the people of Israel, because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. Therefore I say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace. Briti Shalom. Now, one of the things about this, and you've heard me speak extensively in times past about the scrolls, about how there's not just hundreds of laws and procedures that have to be followed, there are thousands of laws and procedures that have to be followed in order to create an authentic, kosher Torah scroll. It's not just a matter of slapping ink on a paper and calling it good. There's particular skins, there's particular inks. You can't go by memory on what it is you're writing. You go letter by letter, you check, you verify, you cross-reference, you're watched by an elder scribe. It's intense. It is absolutely mind-boggling, the painstaking details all parties went through for these scrolls. And one of the things they have are these abnormalities where some letters are dynamically oversized or dramatically oversized. There's some that are undersized. There's some that are backwards, that are upside down. And in this word for peace, there is an abnormality in the word shalom. Shin, Lamed, Vav, Mem. And this letter Vav, it's actually broken in half. And what's interesting about that letter, about it being broken in half, is it almost looks like it creates 2 letters in that one. One is a yud, and a yud, of course, means hand. And on the lower half of this break, there's a spike. There is a miniature Vav. And it talks about this word peace, and there's a little commentary you can create here about there being something involving a hand and a nail to create peace. I don't know what you may think of that, but it is what it is. Now, the letter Vav is actually the 6th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and since it's the 6th letter, it's also known to be the letter of man, as according to Genesis, man was created on the sixth day. And so we have something in the image of man being broken to create peace. And then, of course, there's the added dynamic to where this letter was broken in half along with a hand and a nail, a man broken to create peace. Anybody in the context of Scripture you can think of who came in the image of man broken to create peace, who's associated with a hand and a nail and a nail and a hand? Well, when you add that information together along with the fact that Vav is in the shape of a Roman nail, you kind of start seeing some other things that are really neat. And even if you drop the letter Vav from that word to where you have the word Shalim, it means perfect. We find that there is a perfect man who came in the image of man, perfect one came in the image of man, who wound up becoming broken and took a nail in his hand to create peace, to help stop this transgression, to help stop this plague. And it's just kind of interesting that when you start taking a look and you start studying these words and letters, the commentaries that flow with information we're already aware of, it just adds this huge, deep grassroots network that are connected and has nutrients coming up from places you didn't even know existed in the context, in the walls of Scripture itself. It's almost like this is the living word. When I see this letter broken, I can't help but think of Jacob. He was one of the very several instances that you find in Scripture where there is a man who was broken at some point to become something better to help create peace. The name Jacob, Yaakov, is associated with the word heel, and it's the lowest part of a human because it's what makes contact with the earth. In the heel, it's curved. And you find this moment in Jacob's life where it's this BC AD moment where he becomes Israel, or he has the name addition Israel to his name. And at that point, he had this struggle, he had this wrestling match to where he himself became broken. And through that being broken, he became somebody better, somebody bigger, somebody more prominent. He had that hip issue where his hip was touched and disconnected and he was broken. Then he became what is known as Yisrael. Well, Israel is actually said to come from the word Yisar, which also means to help make straight. And I feel there are instances where you and I have a lot of complications where we are like Jacob, becoming Israel. We're curved. Our lowest point is here at the earth. But we have a situation that breaks us, helps bring us closer to peace and perfection, shalom and shalim, to where we become more upright. We become more straight in our integrity, in our spiritual walk, in our gaze as to who He is. And so I just thought this was something kind of neat to throw out there to contemplate, kind of roll and chew around. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please throw them my way. Hopefully I've given you something to think about here. And as always, thank you so much for your time. Be blessed.